live. So we'll go ahead and kick it off here. Austin, do you want to begin recording? You already are. So my name is Steve Curley. I am the Associate State Director for the Oregon SBDC Network, and just wanted to welcome everyone here today. This is our webinar on the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act update. So we're going to be going over different aspects of what has changed there. And I'm going to introduce Noah Brockman. Noah is the lead for our capital access team and that program. This has been a program that we in the state of Oregon have had for several years now to help businesses access capital. And I'll let Noah take it from there, talk a little bit, and he's going to introduce the panelists. Before I do, just one other note of how to ask questions. You have the chat function, and we will use that chat function to answer your questions, and there's already quite a number of questions there. So please put your questions in the chat, because you're not able to be audio because we have so many folks on the webinar. So we'll work off the chat to answer your questions. And I'll turn it over to Noah. Thanks, Noah.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Again, Noah Brockman, and I lead the capital access team for the Oregon SBDC network. For the last 9 or so years, we've been working with SBDC clients statewide on specialty advising on access to capital. So we actually have, so in normal times, what that means is working with people to get startup capital, expansion capital, funding for business acquisitions. And what that typically looks like is working with someone on a business plan, giving them feedback on their plan, financial projections, and working with folks to understand what their different funding options are, to put together a finance strategy. Lots of different types of capital out there, and some of it very specialized. So we always try and work with people on strategies for really dialing in the funding solution with the type of project they're trying to get funding. The way to get assistance from the capital access team, which does have regional advisors around the state, Southern Oregon, Eastern Oregon, Mid-Valley, metro area, and the coast, is to go to our website, which is coming up here on the screen now at bizcentercat.org. You can learn about the team members under the Working With Us tab there. And then to get assistance, if you go to the Start Here button, there's a very brief online form that one fills out, and then that form goes to the regional advisor in your area to then reach out and connect with you and see how they can help. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had to shift gears and specialize in advising clients on different types of disaster relief and recovery funding options that might be available for your businesses. So we set up a page, COVID-19 funding, that goes over different national or federal funding programs, statewide programs. Maybe click on the statewide one, grants and loans, and then even regional programs by city, county, or even business districts. So there's, so much funding that's come out in response to this. So just wanted to give you a little overview. So agenda-wise for today's webinar is we're going to do, we have with us a guest presenter, a banker today. I'll let my colleague introduce her. She's going to present on changes and updates to the Paycheck Protection Program that passed through a few weeks ago through Congress and signed by the President. And then we'll go into some questions and answers about the program and those updates. And we have with us on the call our our SBA District Director, Marty Golden. Marty, thanks for joining us. He's going to be available to join us on the Q&A. And then let me introduce my colleague. Eric Lind is a retired banker from, spent most of his career in the Mid-Valley out of Eugene, Springfield. He's recently joined the Capital Access team as a regional advisor from that area. And Eric's going to be introducing our guest presenter. So go ahead and take it away, Eric. And you want to unmute yourself first. Looks like you're still muted there, Eric. There we go. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Noah. Good afternoon, everybody. As Noah indicated, I retired from banking actually a little over a year ago. Towards the end of last year, I became bored, and that's not a good thing. And so around the first of the year, I began a part-time job as a capital access team advisor through Lane, the SBDC here in Eugene. And Noah explained kind of what we do, help businesses, whether they're maybe a startup, but usually want to expand, or maybe they've never had a commercial loan and they need help. So we provide that help. What was interesting, things were kind of a little slow when I first started at the beginning of the year, and then right at the end of March, I was working on, or at the end of February, I'm sorry, working on 3 business acquisitions. Then the COVID-19 hit, and they all shelved that. So as Noah indicated, we shifted gears, and I actually kind of became an expert a little bit in the PPP, and actually helped put together and speak on webinars regarding the PPP and the EIDL. And then I've been working with Lane SBDC as a CAT advisor, and then with the PPP actually expanded into help the Chemeketa SBDC in Salem and the Lynn Benton SBDC with their advisors and with their businesses, and help understand and navigate the PPP and the EIDL. And it's kind of interesting. Last week and a half, 2 weeks, actually have finally seen it perking up, and there has been some activity regarding potential commercial loans. And so what I'd like to do at this time is introduce Ashley Horner. It is a pleasure to introduce Ashley Horner of Summit Bank. They are partners with the SBDC network. A little bit of background, actually a lot of background. I probably go on for 10 minutes about Ashley, but I'll keep it short. Ashley's been with Summit Bank 13 years. She's the SBA program administrator, and she's been doing that for the last 6 years. And then we need a little drum roll right here. I don't know if you could do that. Last Wednesday, Ashley was promoted to Senior Vice President at Summit Bank, and trust me, folks, that's a big deal. Ashley and Summit Bank have consistently been one of the top SBA 7A lenders in the state of Oregon. She's very active with NAGLE, which is the National Association of Government Guaranteed Lenders, and they're kind of a lobbyist and represent small business lending interests, specifically in the SBA loan programs. She's been an instructor, or is an instructor. She's a chairperson for Region 10, among many other things. What Summit Bank did, and actually did, kind of was amazing on the PPP, and this kind of segue into her, is the initial round of the PPP began on Friday morning, April 3rd. And what Summit Bank was able to do is pretty tremendous. By Monday, April 6th, they had actually had $95 million in loans approved with the SBA. And then in the second round, another 19. So Ashley's very well versed in the PPP. And I'll turn it over to Ashley. She's going to speak on the PPP, the Flexibility Act, and the forgiveness. Ashley, it's all yours.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, everybody, for having me today. I know we have individuals, representatives on the call today that have received PPP loans or they're thinking about getting a PPP loan. And I know I have some of my NAGO colleagues and SBA lenders on the line as well. So pleasure to be here with everybody. I kind of want to take a step back before we jump into the slides. I've heard the analogy lately, or I guess over the last couple months, it's like we're building a plane in the air as a symbolism of the PPP loan program. And although that's very true, I feel like now we are potentially encroaching on landing and we still can't find the landing gear. So please know, everybody on this call, there's still guidance to be provided, and make sure that you're in communication with your partners throughout this whole process, being your lenders. That's truly going to be your advocate and your partner to make sure you maximize forgiveness. It seems like March 27th was years away, yet it was clearly a few months ago. I'm excited to be a part of the SBA community, and I'm really passionate about being able to help small businesses. And I think through the PPP loan program, it really allowed us bankers to kind of become frontline assistants to small businesses all around the nation. So it's quite rewarding, and something I think all of the bankers and lenders on the call will always remember. And maybe 3 years of therapy, maybe we'll forget, but it's been quite a ride. So I'll jump into kind of the slides, and what we're talking about today is primarily the Flexibility Act that was recently passed. So just so everybody's aware, when President Trump signed the bill into law, it was a very exciting time, and the building of the airplane began. And then through kind of the first month, we knew that something was going to come out that was going to provide some flexibility, hence the Flexibility Act, that would allow a little more grace in the way that borrowers were able to utilize the funds. And that's truly what we're going to kind of conquer quickly this afternoon. And then we're going to roll into some frequently asked questions. I understand that there's a lot of questions on the call, and hopefully myself and Marty and others are going to be able to provide our insight and some guidance to help you kind of get through some of those questions. So one of the biggest components of the change was really the loan proceeds. That was a huge component of the Flexibility Act that was signed into law. So when we originally had the PPP loan, what we knew is that you needed to spend 75% on payroll and 25% on other eligible expenses. Those eligible expenses was interest on any outstanding mortgage or debt obligations, utilities, there's some details inside the word utilities, and some rent payments. So the utilities, didn't call out garbage, but it did call out phone and gas and electric, and transportation, which I think is a word that we all are learning. How does transportation play into utilities? And that's a question we get very often at Summit. What is the transportation utility? And it might sound naive of me, but I don't know what that answer is quite yet. So kind of back to how it originally was, 75% was going to be payroll, 25% on other eligible expenses. And then it shifted, much to everybody's applause, 60-40. So now 60 is on those eligible payroll expenses. And then 40% gets to be used on those other eligible expenses. And I will, if you wouldn't mind advancing, thank you. The other really exciting component was the covered period. So originally we had 8 weeks, which came out to be 56 days that were eligible periods to utilize the funds. And we're going to talk a little bit about what the use of the funds a little deeper and how to do that. But the exciting part was that it got shifted out to 24 weeks. So loans that were provided before the June 5th cutoff, those borrowers get to utilize either the 24-week period or they get to utilize the 8-week period. They get to choose, which is wonderful for borrowers to have that flexibility. If you were awarded a loan after the June 5th date, or if you're going to be debating about getting a loan, automatically 24 weeks. Now, the one piece that I kind of want to stop here for just a split second is there's been a lot of discussion about what does 8 weeks, 56 days, or even the 24, but this question really resides more in the 8 weeks, is what is the word incurred versus paid? So although you have 8 weeks, 56 days to utilize your funds, does that mean that I have to cut the check and it has to clear for payroll in those 56 days? What does that mean? Does that mean that if on day 2, if I ran my entire payroll for the last month, do I get to count all of that? Or do I have to wait? This is one area, incurred versus paid, that you'll recognize is brought up throughout the variety of the forgiveness forms. It's brought up in the instructions of the forgiveness forms, which we're going to be talking about a little bit later. But in every institution, bank, credit union, and lender, I would say that we have a pretty united interpretation of this. But again, I would suggest that borrowers do communicate directly with their lender. I'll share the way that us at Summit Bank, the way that we are interpreting the word incurred versus paid. So during those 56 days, when it comes to payroll, and I really want to focus on the word payroll here. When it comes to payroll, it has to be wages that were, the word earned is the word that I've been using, it has to be earned. So for example, if Noah and I worked together and Noah was part of our payroll, I would say that Noah has to earn 56 days worth of pay. And when he is paid for those 56 days can be either during the 56 days or after the 56 days. Okay, so let me stop for just a second. I had ABC Coffee House, and at ABC Coffee House, we got our loan on, let's say it was April 13th, and I ran payroll on April 15th. But that April 15th payroll run was for April 1 through 10. Okay, so we have 1 through 10, we got our loan on the 13th, and I cut payroll on the 15th. The Summit Bank interpretation is that I cannot count my payroll run on the 15th as part of the proper use of funds. And there's been some discretion there, some interpretation, and a variety of professionals are weighing in on what that means. But at our institution, and I would say a lot of our NAGLE partner institutions, that is their interpretation when it comes to the payroll. Now, Noah and I, we're still working together. My light turned off in my room, sorry for my flashing around there. So Noah and I continue to work together, which is wonderful. And now Noah, I'm gonna run a payroll on April 30th. And Noah's been with me, so now I get to count all of that payroll from, let's say it was the 13th through the 30th. So it's gonna be pay that Noah has earned. He has earned the pay. Now we're done with our 56 days, and I can run another payroll on day 72. That is for wages. I'm paying Noah for the time that he worked with me for those 56 days. Maybe it was those last 10 days I get to count. Okay, so I know that that's a little confusing and it's difficult to explain. I typically do kind of like an illustration when I'm trying to discuss it with clients. But basically the term incurred versus paid, it can definitely be incurred during your covered period. And then with the 8 weeks, it can be paid after, okay? But the Flexibility Act cleared this up tremendously. We're all so grateful. Now we have 24 weeks. So the likelihood of us burning through, us at ABC Coffee, have burned through our 2.5 times payroll in what is technically 6 months is very likely. So this whole incurred versus paid discussion almost flies straight out the window. So as painful as those last few seconds probably were to try to explain incurred versus paid, Flexibility Act cleaned it right up. So we're all so grateful for that. And we're gonna move on to the next slide, which is payments. Yeehaw, this was huge for us as lenders predominantly. So what was originally was that borrowers who participated in the PPP loan, guess what? 6 months, no payments. Great. But then as we started to wade through forgiveness, we were thinking, oh brother. So we got 6 months of no payments, But the SBA, so the lenders, let's start with the lenders. The lenders by law have 60 days to determine forgiveness. Okay, so if I at ABC Coffee submitted my loan package for forgiveness, excuse me, my lender had 60 days to think about, to review it, to see if they concurred with my forgiveness amount or not. Then they would submit it to SBA. Through what vehicle, that is yet to be determined. And then the SBA has 90 days. They have 90 days to review and make a determination on their own. Now, to what degree that is, again, yet to be determined. Could be an audit, could just be a double check of some numbers. We don't know yet. We haven't gotten there yet. But when you start to think, okay, so I have 60 days for the bank, and I have 90 days for SBA. Oh, gee. So now I've ate through 5 months, and let's pretend like I just went with the 8-week period. Well, I had 2 months. So now 2 plus 5 is 7 months. I'm making payments. Oh my goodness. The great thing about the Flexibility Act, huge weight off of everybody's shoulders. It ended up changing completely the way that the payments were going to be, I would say, allocated. So now what happens is you don't have to worry, you borrower don't have to worry about the payment amount until SBA has communicated back with the bank about whatever that forgiveness is. So if I'm hoping at ABC Coffee, let's hope I got 100% forgiveness, fingers crossed. Submitted all the paperwork, bank waited 60 days, SBA waited 90 days. They came back and said, great, guess what? Full forgiveness, awesome. Well, let's pretend like they maybe said, you've got a little bit left. We don't agree with something. So maybe I have a $10,000 remaining balance. Well, that's fine. Now I can start to make my payments, where beforehand, I would have had to start to make payments on an amount, and it could have gotten quite murky. So this was huge for us. Now, the other part that this also addressed was kind of the I don't want to say the cutoff, but some timeline requirements, if you will, as it pertains to the payments and applying for forgiveness. So in the Flexibility Act, now what we get the opportunity is after 24 weeks, which is your new period to spend your money, right? So we got 24 weeks to spend our money, 6 months. We apply for forgiveness. You have another 10 months. And then if you haven't done anything, then you got to pay back your loan. So if maybe Eric had an auto body shop and Eric decided, I'm just going to wait out my 24 weeks and then I'm not going to do anything. Well, after 10 months and the 24 weeks, okay, so now we're at, good grief, what is that, 16 months? Then your loan payments are going to start. And your loan payments ultimately are going to be off the whole max loan amount that you took because you didn't ask for any forgiveness. Now, if we waited the entire duration and Eric at his auto body shop waited the very last minute. So we burned through the 24 weeks and then nearly right up to that 10-month period, he would have 8 months to pay back his loan. So I think the message here that we need to remember is, although there's some great flexibility in kind of waiting to get your package turned in, you're going to be stuck with a very short amortization period. So you're probably be a better choice to try and get those ducks in a row, if you will, that Eric should probably get his package in before he waits the 24 weeks plus the 10 months, because that's going to be a pretty short amortization. I would also say, complete my opinion, Ashley Horner's opinion, not that of the SBDC, is I think a big takeaway out of the Flexibility Act, sincerely, is this is really meant to help businesses and lenders. We're partners in this together. So this isn't meant to be a gotcha game at all. I think that what was set forth in the Flexibility Act is kind of a way to clean up and provide some additional guidance and flexibility out of the original PPP Act, is it really is the message of we're really trying to find a ground to get it forgiven. We want to be your partners here at the SBA and Treasury. We're really trying to find some vehicles to make that easier for all. Okay, so moving on to maturity. This one's really, really quick. Original loans, guess what? You got 2 years. But with the Flexibility Act, what ended up happening is loans after June 5, you get a 5-year, and then loans that were before the Flexibility Act, in agreement with your lender, you get the potential option to move that to a 5-year. So if at ABC Coffee, I already got my loan before June 5, then I have a 2-year, unless my lender and I mutually agree that we're going to push it to a 5-year term. But Eric, maybe he got his after June 5, so he automatically gets a 5-year term. And the rate still both ways, whenever you got it, is still the 1%, which is wonderful. Okay, we're going to move over to Safe Harbor. Oh boy, Safe Harbor. Talk about another wonderful cleanup, I think, that happened with the Flexibility Act. Added some Safe Harbor components. So for individuals on the call today, if you haven't read through some of the forgiveness paperwork, basically there's some components, 2 large ones, that can dilute your ability of forgiveness. And those areas are Fte calculation, and there's some math, and that's not the purpose of our call today, isn't to break down the math per se, but there's an Fte calculation, and then there's a wage calculation. And if you did a reduction in either one of those 2 areas during your covered period, so again, covered period is your 8 weeks or your 24 weeks, then you potentially have an impact to your forgiveness amount. You won't get it all forgiven, long story short. And there's some math inside there. So when we first got our glimpse of forgiveness on the SBA Form 3508, it said that if you brought back your FTE and repaired some of your wage reductions by June 30, then any of those impacts to your forgiveness would be washed away. So June 30th, if I brought everybody back to the coffee house, then game on, all good, don't have to feel a reduction, if you will, on my forgiveness. What the expansion of Safe Harbor did, especially since they expanded that covered period to 24 weeks, is they provided even more grace when it comes to the Safe Harbor component. And really what we're talking about here is, I don't want to read on the slide to you all, I'm sure everybody's capable of doing that, but one big takeaway that we got was, if your business was impacted during your covered period to a thing, because of a thing called COVID, which I'm pretty sure we're all quite familiar with at this point, and if your impact from business was, perhaps you were a restaurant and you were mandated by the governor to close or to limit certain types of services, whatever your business was, maybe you weren't an essential business and perhaps that was the mandate to close. If you were impacted, you get a Safe Harbor requirement there. So that's pretty phenomenal. The next component, as you can read, is your FTE calculation as well. When it comes to expanding out that deadline beforehand, it doesn't say that it was June 30 originally, and now we're looking at as late as December 31 for that Safe Harbor. In fact, on page 4 of the 3508 regular form, the newly released regular one, which we're going to get into the 2 different forms, it actually says FTE at the earlier of December 31, 2020, and the date this application is submitted. So I applaud how the Flexibility Act, I think, really opened up the arena, so that way borrowers had the opportunity to really seek that full forgiveness, which is a phenomenal, again, I think, a testament to, we really all want to work together and let this be a real good resource for borrowers and the communities that we all serve. So with the maturity and the Safe Harbor, we got most recently, hot off the press, was our PPP Easy Forgiveness application. Talk about a breath of fresh air for all of us. And the next slide does discuss some of the great features of that Easy Forgiveness application. So think of it almost like I don't want to put a time limit on it, but it's a 5-minute, really quick, simple form. If you can check one of the 3 boxes that is on the corresponding instruction sheet, you get the opportunity to use the Easy Forgiveness form. So just to kind of back up a little bit, I think it was not the Friday we just had, the Friday before that, we lenders and SBA alike, all of us, almost probably everybody on this call has seen it by now, we got brand new forgiveness applications forms. So SBA had come out previously, say about a month ago, with what we lenders call an SBA Form 3508. And it was pretty long. It was about 11 pages, a lot of details, math back and forth, kind of worked from the back and worked your way forward to figure out your forgiveness, had the safe harbor of June, and didn't acknowledge the 24-week situation because the Flexibility Act hadn't been signed. And now we have two new 3508 forms. We have the easy, literally easy form with the corresponding instructions. And then we have a brand new generalized 3508 form with that corresponding instructions. And the more general form is more in the weeds when it comes to the calculations as it pertains to FTE and wage reduction. But the easy form really provides for self-employment, independent contractors, as you can read on the slide. If you didn't have any reduction in FTE, you didn't, or you were able to bring them back, of course. And then if you had no more than 25% wage reduction, then you get to use the easy form. And trust me, it is very easy. I would say it's maybe a 5-10 minute. You'll probably spend more time figuring out what your SBA loan number is than trying to fill out the form. So again, it's a great component of what has come forth. I think SBA and Treasury are really trying to get as much information and guidance out there, but ultimately continue to work with your lender and the partners that are surrounding you as a business owners to make sure that you're filling out, taking advantage of every piece of this whole PPP process, if you will. With the expansion of the safe harbor and the forgiveness application, we have had, oh boy, so many questions. So I'm just going to move into 4 really quick questions that we've been getting, at least at Summit Bank. And I know that other lenders in our communities that we serve have also been getting. And so we'll just nail these really quick, and then perhaps we can pause for questions or whatever the gentleman on the call would select for us to do. What is needed to apply for forgiveness, and when do I apply? Well, what is needed, that's kind of an easy one. In the instruction sheet, whatever form you choose, the easy form or the regular form, there is actually half a page that outlines exactly what it is that you need. And beyond that, on the other half of that same page is documents that you, the borrower, have to retain. So just make sure that you can go through that list, check off every single one of them. And when do you need to apply? Well, I would say 1, once you have all the paperwork in order, and 2, just make sure it is definitely before the 24-week plus 10 months period. That way you aren't slapped with any of those fun little payment options that you get on the back end. Do I need to notify my lender if we're using the 24-week period? Now, I will say there is no mandate by SBA to notify your lender, but I think it's always a good choice to be a good partner with the lender that you're partnering with, partner, and perhaps alert them that you are going to elect for the 24-week period, but there's nothing that's requiring you to do so. No form you need to sign, no mandated notification process. So if you'd like to go with 24 weeks, go with 24 weeks. Can I apply for forgiveness if I spend my money before 24 weeks? This has been a hot button issue, and I would first caution everybody by saying that this is something that I would suggest that you talk with your lending partners about. I will share with you my interpretation at this point. Right now, I think it's an either or. Either you apply after your 8-week period and you have your ducks in a row and you're capable of applying, or you wait for 24 weeks. There's some discussion of, but I burned through my money in 12 weeks, so can't I apply right now? And I think that you should talk with your lender about that. But right now, with the way that the applications are set up, you're certifying and stating certain FTE and salary during your covered period. And the covered period, again, is either 8 weeks or 24. So Marty, I saw that you just came on, and perhaps you have a different interpretation of that response.
No, just a little bit of extra guidance there. So currently it's 8 or 24 weeks, but they're looking at making some changes which potentially could allow for asking for forgiveness at a period in between. It's just not out yet. So if you give it a few days, a week or 2, you might see something different.
That would be wonderful. Oh, this is why we all participate on these calls, is these little nuggets of information that can be we're all so grateful for. Thank you, Marty. Thank you. And why would someone apply for forgiveness after 8 weeks? this is a funny one I think our CFO brought straight to me, that it's just silly. Why would you apply at 8 weeks when you have 24 weeks and you can use it all for payroll and just be done? And I said, because people just want to be done, because people have planned to get rid of it in 8 weeks or utilize the money appropriately in 8 weeks. And now they just want off the teacup roller coaster of PPP. So you're still welcome to utilize the 8 weeks. Please know that. Our last slide is just if you have any questions, but I think at this point, what we're probably going to move to is either we can open it up. I'll take lead from whatever you gentlemen would like to do. I saw that things were popping up and I wasn't very good about pausing and then reading. So perhaps I've messed something up along the way.
Yeah, Ashley, so Eric and I are going to help field some questions from the chat. And I think we both have a few questions ready to put forth. And real quick, I just want to let people know that this webinar is being recorded, and so you'll have access to the recording and Ashley's slides at bizcenter.org after the call. But so first question here is, there's some questions about if you're a sole proprietor, owner operator, what is, given the new changes, what's the maximum forgivable amount of loan forgiveness? Is it still the $15,384? Or can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So if you were a sole prop, I have to flip to the correct page. So if you were a sole prop, you're definitely going to use the easy form because you get to check that first box. So that's phenomenal. The next piece is basically, long story short, if you were allotted during your 8-week period, you could only use, when you originally was 56 days, you could use 8 weeks of pay, which meant you had that 0.5 figure you got to figure out a home for. Now with 24 weeks, the whole thing can be forgiven. Boom, love it. So now for 24 weeks period, the max amount that you can be capped at is $20,833 for owners or self-employment individuals. This is found on page 3 of the loan forgiveness application. So page 3, and it's on the instructions, my apologies. Page 3, line 9. Okay, so it outlines that 24-week covered period. This amount is kept at $20,833. Marty, anything you'd add to that?
Do you want a job?
No. Very generous.
Awesome. Good job. I'd like to thank you. You're doing a great job, and appreciate your help on this.
Oh,
I don't have anything to add. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Great.
Marty,
Noah, do you want me to take one?
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Okay, this one probably for Marty. How can I find out if my original EIDL application dated April 10th is still active?
So I've answered some of the questions. That's one I answered. The ones that were easy to answer and fast, I've been trying to do that. But yeah, I suggested that person email me later on with a idle number, and then I can find out if it's still active or not. I mean, I have to contact somebody, but they'll find out for me.
Okay, thanks, Marty. No, I'll take one more. This is a little different one. Actually, a commercial lender type question. So actually, I might even try and answer it, and then I'll turn it over to you. A client has an EIDL. When is that considered debt, which affects the debt ratio? Now or in 12 months when the payments start? So I'm going to say if I'm a banker and I'm doing an annual review for 2018, I'm not going to include that in the debt ratio to see if they met their covenant. If I was looking at a new loan request, I would probably want to consider that new debt payment, even though it might be 12 months out before it starts.
Yeah, and
Comment?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think commercial lending to businesses on there looking to be getting loans soon, we're just essentially probably going to be a little more conservative. So just knowing that debt's out there and just making sure that the business is able to meet all its obligations upcoming and present. So I agree with Eric. Yeah.
Can I have a job too?
You have a job.
Oh, okay.
Very funny. Question here about timing and use of PPP funding here. So I think this is from a business advisor. They have a client who is, the business is closed for now due to COVID-19. The business owner is collecting the PUA, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance dollars. They just want to make sure that the business owner can hold on to the PPP dollars until the business reopens in a few weeks. Can you talk about how waiting to use those funds, like when do they need to spend them out, I guess is the bottom line question.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Oh, go ahead, Marty. No, go.
They just need to spend it out by the end of the 24-week period. That's why this change was made, is to allow business to have some flexibility as when they start and stop that clock.
And if I understand correctly, they've got to spend it out between the end of the 24-week period or December 31, whichever is sooner. Is that correct?
I think so. I'm also a little confused. I believe that December 31st, 2020 is the new deadline. So I think your interpretation is correct, that if they've gotten the loan now, they won't have to worry about December 31st. They'll 24-week clock will have expired before then.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now, let me just kind of further that. Right now, the end of the program is in less than a week, or about a week. And so everybody that's, unless you're planning to apply in the next couple days, everybody that's got one of these loans has already gotten it. So their 24-week clock will have ended before December.
Okay, thanks for clarifying on that.
Okay, another question. Our bank told us our EIDG, I think she means EIDL funds, would not have to be repaid. Is that correct?
That's incorrect. What does not have to be repaid is the idle advance. So many people have gotten an amount from $1,000 to $10,000, which was called an advance. That doesn't have to be repaid. The actual EIDL loan itself, though, does have to be repaid on terms.
Okay, thanks, Marty. One more here. Can we use the wages paid to our part-time employees as part of the 60% for forgiveness? They were part-time before the PPP and no hours are reduced. Can their part-time payroll be included?
Yes.
Okay.
Here's someone who received a PPP loan and then repaid it in full 3 days later. Can they reapply again?
So the answer to that is no. You can only get one PPP loan. However, Congress, the ranking member of the Senate Small Business Committee, is talking about new legislation, and one of the things that might do is allow people to borrow more money, which would mean you could apply again. But again, the program ends, the applications end June 30th. So until and unless Congress extends that deadline, there won't be any more applications once June 30th passes.
So follow-on question to that about shifting gears over to the EIDL for folks who got an EIDL loan, and whether or not they've gotten a PPP loan, can they get more funds through EIDL as like a second loan request there?
So early on, I'd heard that you could, that they said people would be allowed to ask for more money later. I have not heard anything about that in a long time, though. So I guess I'm not sure what the answer to that is.
Okay, I've got another question here. Does the EIDL amount factor into the formula for the PPP forgiveness? Is it 60% only the PPP or the total of the PPP and the EIDL?
I think
Ashley,
it's just
you're smiling.
Go ahead, Ashley.
Well, no, Marty, I think we might be about ready to say this. We know that it asks for the advance amount, And what I have read, which we all know we can read things and it's not gospel by any stretch, is I believe, and Marty, I think I'm probably crossing the line here. If you got the advance, it is taken as a haircut against your forgiveness amount.
No, that's true. Yeah.
Okay. So if I got
But
it,
not the idle.
yeah. Yeah. So if I got $100,000 forgiveness, I qualify for 100% forgiveness. Awesome. But I got the 10,000 idle grant, then I would be 100,000 minus my 10,000 grant, resulting in 90% forgiven. So now I have $10,000 loan with the lending institution under the PPP terms.
You're correct.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Good job, Ashley. And what this may be getting to, I'll just do my own version of, say, Part B, is that maybe somebody received the PPP early on in April, and then later on, a month later, 6 weeks, then they were approved for their EIDL, and they may be asking the question regarding payroll, because the EIDL you can use for payroll costs. And would that affect the forgiveness, or do you have to be careful when you spend the payroll for the PPP as opposed to if you're going to spend it for the EIDL? Is that a fair enough question, Marty?
So
would,
can you, as long as you don't spend it for the same payroll, which would be hard to do unless you want to pay somebody twice, but you spend the PPP money on payroll, and then once that money's gone, if you happen to have EIDL funds, then you can pay subsequent payrolls with the EIDL funds.
Okay, perfect. Great answer. Thank you. It seems there's been a fair amount of confusion out there, and if people could do that. Obviously, SBA doesn't want you to double dip, so to speak, and use both loans for the same payroll periods. So thanks, Marty.
So here's an interesting question about the PPP and forgiveness. So here's a business owner who, during COVID-19, they lost one employee during that covered period, and an existing employee picked up those part-time hours. So they, essentially the total hours worked by staff was about the same. So the question is, does that loss of that one employee count against them for loan forgiveness? Since they're, that's changed, but the hours worked by employees is still about the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when the business owner, there's math when it comes to the FTE calculation. Long story short, very broad stroke, you should be perfectly fine. You end up, the FTE calculation, you get to choose from a really simplified method, which is if you work 40 hours plus each employee, let's pretend like all 6 of us on this panel right now, Eric works 20 hours and all of us work 48. Well, 40 or more, we all get a score of uno, 1. And then Eric, we get to choose if Eric gets, he gets a score of either, well, 40 was a bad example, either an automatic 0.5. Let's pretend like Eric works 15 hours. We'll make it difficult. He either gets a score of a 0.5 or he gets 15 divided by 40. Don't make me do the math, that number. So if, let's pretend Eric and Steve, they were both 20-hour employees, or the other 4 of us were 40 hours. So we would have a 1, 1, 1, 1. So we'd have a 4 plus 2.5. So we would have a score of 5, right? Then Eric moved to Tahiti. He doesn't want to work anymore. And now Steve picked up his hours. Then Steve, who was really just part of this, is now a full 5. So we'd be perfectly fine under that situation. Do the FTE calculation, you'll get your answer. But from that broad summary, you should be fine.
Awesome. Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Ashley, here's one for you, a little bit different, but this kind of gets into when people are businesses signing for loans, maybe pledging collateral under the EIDL, under the PPP, you don't pledge collateral. Yep. Anyway, planning on purchasing a business that received PPP funds mid-May. purchase date is scheduled for July 1st. Will the PPP transfer with the business? You're welcome.
Oh, thanks, Eric. Okay, well, let's think about this. July 1st, it's going to be a transfer. Let's pretend, let's keep it easy, and let's call it a stock transfer, because the business doesn't really die, if you will, with the stock transfer. It just sort of lives on in somebody else's house. And that, ooh, boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. If I were you, Mr. or Mrs. Buyer, I would make sure I understand top to bottom, left to right, everything that was done, and I would communicate with your lender, whoever it is that was your lender, and seek their advice on what would be the proper path. If it's an asset purchase, the debt should die with the original owner, so that could be really messy. Oh boy, I really hope that there's an opportunity to maybe just extend your purchase date. That might be the best solution. Marty, what do you have something that you think about adding to that?
I was just going to ask, obviously, or not obviously, but it depends partly on whether loan documents require prepayment if there's a change of ownership. But I don't think that it's probably silent on that because they're pretty brief loan documents.
Yeah. And I think actually, whether somebody's doing the 24-week and they've asked for forgiveness, maybe it's going to all be forgiven, maybe it isn't, but the best possible thing is probably to wait so that if it is actual debt that needs to be repaid, it gets paid at closing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. Hopefully the seller is amicable to just sort of pushing it out a little bit further.
Right.
Here's an interesting question. So their business has closed for the second time after reopening due to a surge of COVID-19 cases, mandated closure by the state. They are wondering if they can pause on their covered period, pause the ticking clock as PPP funds relate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
This is a good time for me to kind of put out a commercial. The shorter answer is that is probably not addressed anywhere in the documentation, in any of the written guidance. And so the answer would be, we're not sure. And the thing to keep in mind here is that everybody who's talking on the phone today, including myself, are looking at what has been put out by the Department of Treasury in terms of various guidelines, interim final rules, and the people who write those are doing their best to write them and picking up most situations that they can think of. Excuse me.
I had my phone going off a little bit ago. I was trying to figure out how do I send it to voicemail from my desk.
Sorry about that. I was on silent. Where was I? So folks who, not every situation is addressed in these documents. For the most part, the people who wrote them in Washington with the Department of Treasury probably haven't thought of everything yet. There's so many things that they're trying to keep up with. So all we're doing as professionals here is reading the guidance and doing our best to interpret it. But at the end of the day, that's what they are. It's interpretations. So you're really the best off by reading the guidance yourself, making decisions based on reading the applications, and doing your best to make the call, because at the end of the day, that's all you can do. There isn't going to be good guidance on a lot of the questions that you have, unfortunately. What happens is that when enough questions go back to the Department of Treasury, then they start to address them, and that's why there's been a dozen amendments. Because as people ask things, they're coming up with new guidance. For instance, I mentioned that what happens if somebody wants to use 14 weeks worth of payroll and not 8 or 24. Somebody thought about that fairly recently, and they're starting to figure that out. But that's really the best thing you can do, is to look at the documents themselves that are all at the Treasury website and do your best to interpret them. And don't, we know that there are really tough decisions that you have to make depending on what an answer might be, and that it's very frustrating when you don't get a good answer to a very relevant question. But the reality is that's just kind of the situation right now. And so to answer the original question, that's a good question, but there isn't guidance out on that yet.
Actually, here's one. As a self-employed business LLC with no employees, 2 owners, that doesn't run a payroll but takes draws, how do we prove wages? So I think that's in referring to the forgiveness.
Mm-hmm. Okay. This one can be a little difficult to unpack. Let me start with a simpler answer, and because it's a difficult one to answer. So if you were, which I know this is not the case, but if you were an S Corp, or not an S Corp, good grief, a sole prop, the way that you would end up determining your eligible payroll figure would have been the way that you almost applied for it, your 2019 Schedule C. Whether it was filed or not, it's whatever was prepared, and that should have been part of the application, and therefore what your loan amount was pivoted off of. When it comes to partnership draws, like at Summit Bank, we didn't concur that partnership draws were eligible payroll expenses, and therefore the borrower would have received a PPP loan because of our interpretation. However, I would, whomever the individual is asked the question, if that is how you were granted your PPP loan was based off of draws that you were making, I would go to your lender and ask perhaps how they would like you to document the draws. Unfortunately, Eric, I didn't extract information regarding partnership draws. I did see it as seller self-employment income. If you were really an LLP and there was self-employment income, there was a vehicle, I believe, to note that payment, because you could see it out of the way that you spent the money like a normal payroll. But when it comes to just partner draws like distributions, we at Summit weren't considering those payroll, so I'm probably not well versed in how to properly answer that. I'd go back to
okay. Fair enough. Ashley, so if it was, say, a self-employed business and just the sole owner, no employees, how do you prove payroll or wages?
Mm-hmm. So
on the forgiveness?
Mm-hmm. On the forgiveness, the information that we were kind of flying without a little bit of guidance on this piece. But if I was a sole, let's pretend like I'm a realtor, I'm just a sole prop realtor. The way that I would submit my forgiveness right now, what we're asking our sole props to do, or we're suggesting that they do at the end of their 24-week period, because there's no point in them asking for it at 8 weeks, because they can't maximize that forgiveness piece, right? Because they can only get the two times their payroll, they can't get the 2.5 times. So assuming it's the 24 weeks right now, what we are telling them is to resend us your Schedule C for 2019, and we will use that as your proof of your payment for yourself for 2020. I know it sounds silly because you think you should write yourself a check, like Ashley Horner Realtor should write Ashley Horner person, but right now the guidance hasn't gotten granular as to exact documentation for a sole prop. So right now we're just going to be utilizing what we had to determine the loan amount.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we still have a number of questions unanswered. Wondering if our panelists are able to stay on a few more minutes.
Oh yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Okay, here's an easy one. Question about, can they take the CARES Act tax credit that was passed and the PPP, or they can only do one or the other? Can you talk about that?
Marty, I believe that they can take both now, but I'm not a CPA, nor am I going to pretend to give CPA advice. But Marty, do you have more onto that?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sure. I think you're right.
I would double check with your well-respected CPA partnership. Sorry, I'm not more help with that exactly.
Yeah, it looks like we've had a few questions. When does the 24-week clock begin?
Ooh, the day you get your money is the day your clock starts. So the day you get your direct deposit, you pick up your cashier's check, the millions of pennies up on your front doorstep, that is the day your 24 weeks start.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Can you, okay, so as long as we're talking about when the clock starts on the 24-week period, can you talk about the alternative payroll covered period versus the covered period?
Yes, yes. That was a great addition when we got the original 3508 form a few weeks ago. So what Noah's talking about is if you had a bi-weekly or more often. So just so everybody's clear, bi-weekly is not semi-monthly. So like at Summit, we get paid on the 5th and 20th. That is not bi-weekly. It has to be like every other Friday. So there might be some months when you get 3 paychecks. That's bi-weekly. So if you had bi-weekly or more often, perhaps you paid weekly, you got the opportunity to move your window of covered period. So your 56 days or 24 weeks, you got to move it just a smidgen. And instead of it starting on your disbursement date, it got to start on the very first day of your payroll period. Okay, so does that kind of make sense? You got to kind of shift it down to your next payroll. So that way it was really smooth bookkeeping paper trail wise.
And is there a box to check to make that designation, or do they just essentially operate that on that assumption?
Yeah, so on your application, you get to select, well, you get to tell your lender which payroll cycle you are, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, such, and then you get to write down if you're going to do the covered period, and then you fill in your 2 dates, or you get to write in your alternative covered period if that's the period you'd like to go with, and then you fill in those 2 dates. So it's a box plus a couple date fill-in sections.
Great. Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
As a sole proprietor, how do I comply with the 60% for payroll requirement?
Ooh, you're a sole prop. You're going to be 100%. Well, if you are a sole prop, I would suggest you wait 24 weeks, and then it's all going to be payroll.
Right.
Follow up on that, Ashley. Is
Yeah.
there any advantage in trying to essentially speed through the period to get to a forgiveness application before the end of their covered period?
Well, I see 2 answers in that. If you wanted to speed it up right now with the information we have, and again, this is kind of what Marty alluded to, a little bit ago, and it might have gotten lost because it was attached to a different question. So right now, the way that we are interpreting with the little bit of guidance that we have is you either are choosing 8 or 24, but Marty may have alluded to a negative information that we might be able, if once you've spent the money, there might be some changes where you can wait for something in between those 2 periods, perhaps. I would say the only way a sole prop could even get to 8 weeks and get maximum forgiveness is if they had some kind of rental fee, perhaps. Maybe they had a mortgage of a rent obligation that really ate up that other 40% or 10%, whatever that number is outside of 8 weeks of payroll. And then you get off the PPP roller coaster. I mean, that's a solid win. So there's that piece. Marty, anything you'd add to that?
So I have a kind of, I agree with everything, but I have a slightly different take on it in terms of how fast you want to do this. First of all, the amount you're going to get, it's only 2.5 months of payroll. So the 24, it's not going to take you 24 weeks to spend that. The flexibility there is so that you can not start paying employees or yourself right away if for whatever reason you don't want to do that. You just have to have spent it by the end of the 24 weeks. Now, when you put in the application, as Ashley mentioned in her slides, you could have a long time before you start having to pay this back. If you take a 24-week period, you've got 24 weeks, you have 10 months after that to apply for forgiveness. The bank can take up to 2 months. The SBA can take up to 3. It's not our intention to take that long. I understand the process is going to be fairly automated. But if you if you can agree on a 5-year term with the bank, you could end up not having to make any payments on this loan for 2 years. And so that's a long time for this to be deferred, and that's generally to your benefit. If you have a 2-year repayment, the disadvantage of starting later in the process is, as Ashley mentioned, you're going to have a very abbreviated time to repay that. So if you have 5 months left and your loan is amortized over 5 months, you have to be prepared to pay that back in fairly large lumps once you do start paying.
Okay, so different things to consider there.
Yep. Another one, should we keep going a few more, or what do you want to do, Noah? Panelists?
Maybe if our panelists can go to 2:45, we could cut off then.
Okay.
It's okay.
I think this is already answered, but just to make sure, the PPP application deadline is June 30th. Does a submission to the SBA, must it be done by the 30th as well?
It's an assumption, which we all know how much that can backfire. I believe that the system's going to turn off, if you will, for lenders, our ability, because when a lender gets an application, that's great, but then we have to go into a system, commonly referred to as E-Tran, and we extract a loan number, fill in some information, and pull out a loan number. I believe that component is going to be turned off at the end of June. Marty, you might have more insight onto that, but I don't know if we'll have the ability to physically obtain an application, but wait to extract the number from SBA.
Yeah, I just heard something that was a little bit contradictory today, as a matter of fact. They're going to be shutting off the system at 11:59 p.m. Eastern time on the 30th. I've heard it said that if you don't already have a loan app number, then you'd be out of luck. It might be that they'll process the applications that have been put in by 11:59. I'm not sure which that is. It would make sense to try to get in as soon as possible so that you get an actual loan number by 11:59.
Here's a question about PPP money and exhausting funds. Business had to lay off an employee after using PPP money. Can they still get their payroll forgiven?
It would depend on the terms of the layoff of the individual. I would suggest that the borrower read through the forgiveness application, specifically the instruction sheet, because that really provides some clarity about the safe harbor. So I would review it in that nature. Again, I think one big thing, and I haven't brought it up, document. So why was the layoff? When was the layoff? You know, even just personal notes to yourself in a memo or an email to yourself. A lot of this proof, the Fte calculation, if you will, and some other things, will be retained by the borrower for 6 years after forgiveness is granted. So just make sure that you have a good document log, narrative log with yourself of why you made certain decisions and how you felt that one layoff perhaps was attributed to COVID and what had happened with your business, just in case something ever pops up that you need to revisit that.
Here's a lender question. Marty, maybe you can take this. So we know that the last day to apply for PPP is June 30. Is that also true for a lender? Do they need to submit to SBA by June 30 as well, or is there a different date for them?
I'm not sure. Are you talking about the 1502 or the actual application?
I'm not certain. So whatever forms you get on behalf of lenders processing loan requests for PPP, what's the drop dead date from SBA that a lender has to?
The last time an application can be put into the SBA via E-Tran is 11:59 Eastern time on June 30th.
Okay, that clarifies.
Okay, here's another one. If the 24-week period is selected, can the rent payments be included for the forgiveness before the entire 24-week period?
It can only make up 40% of your loan amount, but that's fine if you have like 3 months of rent payments, if I'm understanding the question correctly, like you burn through your 60% of payroll or 70% of payroll, you gotta hit your 60% payroll figure. Then that to maximize your opportunity for forgiveness, you know, outside of our FTE and salary reductions, that other 40% could be your rent. That's perfectly fine. All of it could just be the rent. Can't forward pay your rent though. And you're gonna need to provide your lease agreement showing that you had your lease agreement in place before February 15 of 2020. And you're gonna have to show proof that you paid those rent checks. So I can't pay rent for my coffee company for December of 2020, because that's going to be way outside of my covered period to spend the funds.
Great advice, and I think that's what they meant by the question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Why don't we wrap up? Do we have one more question maybe to wrap up?
Marty, there's been a lot of changes to the EIDL program. Can you just maybe give us an update on what's the status now, and can people still get the advance without getting the loan? And if they do, how do they do that?
Sure. So as of a week ago, I believe the EIDL application portal reopened for everybody. It had been closed for about 6 weeks, I think. Then they reopened it to agricultural companies and a small category of others. So anybody can go in and apply now via the SBA in the SBA disaster portal, and they're going to be processing those as soon as they can. You can ask for an advance, and that right now is going to be based on how many employees you have at $1,000 per employee up to $10,000. Initially, the timing on the advances were well in advance of the EIDLs themselves. I'm not sure what the timing is really anymore in terms of the advance versus the EIDL loan. The EIDL loan process itself has been very, very slow, although I think it has gotten a lot faster lately. Just to give you a stat, because I got it ready, we've had about 46,600 EIDL advances in Oregon so far, and another 24,000 EIDL loans themselves. So the EIDL portal is open and ready for business. It's just not very fast.
Okay.
Thanks for the update on that.
So as we close out here, Noah, did you have anything to add before we kind of add a couple things I want to do to close this down?
I just want to thank our presenters. Ashley, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and help explain some of the updates and changes. Marty, thank you so much for joining us and updating us on EIDL and contributing to the Q&A. I know that we had a lot of questions we weren't able to get to, and that's just, I don't know, one of the things we might try, Steve, is trying to take some of the unanswered questions and maybe address those in an FAQ document that we have kind of as a going document at bizcenter.org on the COVID-19 resource page.
Right here. That's what I was just bringing up. We will post a link to the recording. And Ashley, is it okay if we post your slides? Are you good with that?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll post the slides, and then we do have an FAQ that we already maintain, and I think we could take a look at adding some of these questions to our FAQ, see if we have answers for those and post them there. And then we have stuff related specifically to the PPP, the EIDL, and the other programs, as well as other resources further down the page. But this will be the place to come. Give us a day or so. We'll get everything posted on bizcenter.org, COVID-19. And I posted that in the chat. So anything else, Noah?
So Steve, do we have any other webinars coming up?
Yeah, thanks. So we would like to do this again next week, and we haven't landed exactly on the day. We are looking at bringing on a CPA and hearing their perspective on the loan forgiveness and how that's going. So look for another announcement coming out here later this week on when that will be next week. So we just got to check some schedules and get some things lined up. We'll definitely have another one next week, and that's the plan for now. Is that it, Noah?
Yeah, and I just want to thank you, Eric, for joining us and helping field some of the questions here. This has been a good webinar with lots of different points of view and questions some of us hadn't even heard yet. So it's been helpful for everybody, I think.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Noah's saying. Thank you, Ashley, Marty, Eric, and you too, Noah, for putting this on. It takes a lot of work to pull these off, and you know, but the information is valuable. I apologize we didn't get to all the questions in the chat, but we will try and follow up afterward. Marty posted his email if you have anything direct to ask him. Thanks for doing that, Marty. And look for an announcement of our next webinar for next week coming up soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.